of going to these weekly baseball games with my dad. I'd run around and play in the crisp marine air around a glossy green baseball field, enjoying myself, maybe batting a ball or two. And my dad would play with all these guys I've known my whole life. The coach, Baseball Bob, the Philly Boys, the French Hippie, Tall Joe, Peach Blossom, Loose Larry, the Vietnam vet. And I'm now discovering that all of these people, who are essentially like my surrogate aunts and uncles, all of them were also smugglers or growers, or somehow in the pot industry. Big time. And here's how oblivious I was as a kid / amazed I didn't realize what was going on. There were always garbage bags of pot in my dad's office. Garbage bags, you guys. But this just seemed normal to me. My parents seemed normal. I mean, they weren't straight. That is, they weren't the typical 9-to-5 suburban parents with zero interest in Tibetan tankas, karma, and psychedelic poster art. But they also weren't living on a hippie bus and wearing tie-dye like lots of my friends' parents. And plus, pot was everywhere in Marin County in Northern California. Everyone's family had pot around. Just maybe not garbage bags full. So when my sister told me the shocking news that our parents were drug dealers when I was 14, I was mortified. These are the Nancy Reagan Just Say No, This Is Your Brain on Drugs TV campaign years in the 1980s. Drug dealers are the worst, according to TV and the rest of the world. Do I have your permission to record?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so this is Petunia, one of my best friends growing up, and an honorary member of our family. She knew me and my parents really well. Yeah, so my BFF Petunia spent so much time at our house. I wanted to get your stories of what you thought was going on at my house, and if you ever had any, what did you think of my house and my parents? What did you ever have any inkling of what they did for a job? And
yeah, well, I mean, of course, I knew that your mom was a painter and a mother, and that was very clear, transparent, obvious, and made a lot of sense. You know, you could see. And with your dad, it wasn't clear what he was doing. I feel like we talked about it even as children and said that he was a businessman. We knew that he was a businessman, but definitely not like a 9-to-5, not a suit. Right. But we knew that he made deals. I knew that he made deals because he would like this. I feel like this must have been part of his conversation, that it was like, oh, I'm working on a deal or whatever, but some kind of deal. Yeah. It involved talking on the phone. And so your dad was around and doing business and that's all I knew, really.
Yeah, me too. And I didn't care. Like that was all the businessman. That was an answer. That was answer enough for me.
Yeah, and I could perceive that your family was well off. Your house was like an oasis of plenitude.
Do you remember my dad being super high strung?
Yeah.
So stressed out all the time?
Yeah.
Me too.
But
I'm like, this is why, right?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting, but like, I don't know, like a lot of other people's dads just weren't really around. So like, who knows what those dads were, like who else's dad was around as much as your dad? Like nobody's.
I love hearing Petunia talk about my dad like this because he really was around a lot. There's something special about how my dad subverts the good old dad role. Clad in a Far Side t-shirt, my dad would pad around in his office in his socks, yelling into the phone, stealing our Halloween candy, schooling us on opera and art history. Oh, and he was also smuggling. After I found out the family secret in my teens, Petunia was the only person I confided in.
Yeah, I remember you telling me in this tone of like, I just found this out, can you believe it? And I was like, yeah, I can believe it, actually. Like, yeah. Like, it was not at all surprising. But I didn't know.
Which is funny, because I was shocked. I grew up in this world where pot was everywhere in my household.
Yeah.
It wasn't hidden. I mean, it was just part of the furniture.
Yeah.
And I was totally uninterested in it.
Yeah.
It was boring. I thought pot was uncool. I thought it was lame. I thought it was what grown-ups did. I thought it was, like, totally lame. And it blows my mind to think that literally at any moment My parents could have been busted, and we could have been foster children.
Yeah. Well, this is something that's interesting to me. So, my mom thinks of herself as a very overprotective person. So I'm curious what she knew about your dad's livelihood, because I know that she did the books for your dad for a while. And I wonder what she knew, because she thinks of herself as an overprotective parent, but then she was allowing me to spend vast amounts of time in this household that, like, what if your dad was busted? Or what if some professional enemy, I don't know how likely this would be. I really have no idea. But, did he know people who were dangerous? Possibly he did.
Coming up, my dad loses all of his money in a smuggling trip gone wrong, which just happened to be the night I was born. I'm Rainbow Valentine, and this is Disorganized Crime. We'll be right back. The origin of the word pot is from pataguaya, a wine or brandy that has been steeped in cannabis buds. Pataguaya is short for potacion de guaya, which means the drink of grief. It does seem this job brought its fair share of grief with it. If a deal went wrong, you could lose everything.
Can Dad stop clinking around in the back? We can hear him. And
he's crunching his oatmeal. Yeah, I'll go.
Yeah, Dad is not able to be quiet. Good job. Enjoy your oatmeal, Dad. So, Mom, can you talk about how critical it was that your jobs were a secret? Talk about the high stakes of this job.
The high stakes were that weed was illegal, and everybody thought it was the devil. And if you got caught with even an ounce, you went to jail and could lose your kids. It was super high stakes. So you had to be really careful about not talking about your business to any of your friends or parents of the other children or the soccer parents. You just had to conduct your life like it was really normal, just like everybody else.
Dad finished his oatmeal and chimed in.
I mean, my job was to do it right and stay under the radar and be this schizophrenic living two lives, basically. It didn't bother me. It was either do it right or be dead. It was similar to war. You stick your head above the foxhole and it gets blown off. People are getting busted for less than an ounce of pot. Now, that wasn't real big-time stuff, but when you got into what we were doing, it would cost a fortune in attorneys, even if you did get off. You know, I mean, I was living sort of in two worlds.
Now, both of my parents talk about leading a double life. On one hand, the parents I know, they're devoted, involved, adoring parents and upstanding citizens who participate, to my embarrassment, in my school and life almost too enthusiastically. And on the other hand, they're counterculture outlaws, smuggling up to several thousands of pounds of pot across a God-fearing country, swarming with law enforcement and chock full of hippie and drug-fearing Americans. My dad's career as a smuggler coincided with the inception of the war on drugs, when the country was focused on sending drug dealers and users to prison. And more dangerous drugs were entering the transcontinental smuggling trade, like heroin and cocaine. Drugs where, if you got caught up in those smuggling networks, could lead to a bullet through the head.
You've mentioned feeling like you led a double life. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, well, then I had my friends, which were all my old friends. We trusted everybody from their word, and they were separate from all the people that lived in the community, you know, and the people at the stores. And even your doctor didn't know what was going on, you know, so it's very stressful to lead two lives.
I remember garbage bags of pot at the house.
Yeah, but they were just coming and going. Those were I mean, I'm talking about rooms full of pot where we stashed it. The garbage bags of pot were just samples.
So the garbage bags of pot I remember from when I was a kid were just the tip of the pot iceberg of how much pot my dad was moving. They were samples. Really, at any given point in my childhood, my dad was storing up to 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of pot in our garage or the family storage unit a few miles away from our house. The true and complete story of my birth is the perfect saga to show this double life that my parents led. I was born in 1974 on a dark and stormy night in West Marin, California. We're going to start. It was a dark and stormy night.
Well, but yeah, the storm hadn't hit yet. It was just
dark.
raining and dark in March.
It was dark and stormy. Yes, it was quite a storm.
And that night, my young parents, my dad in his 20s, my mom in her early 30s, lost their life savings in a smuggling trip gone wrong. Now, their life savings was about $36,000 in 1974, which is $195,000 today.
Just figured that's what you cost.
Go make it back for me.
So in 1974, my parents were living in a handmade hippie hobbit house in West Marin, California. It had a long winding staircase up to the circular door. My very pregnant mom would tend to my sister, the Japanese gardens, and her herd of animals. She hated the goose. My dad was enjoying the country life of chickens and his first chainsaw for firewood in this tiny rural town in West Marin, California, near Point Reyes National Seashore. But among the hanging plants, hippie embroidery, and art that adorned the inside of the house, my parents had a custom-built secret room, which at any given point could stash up to 4,000 pounds of pot.
Like in the movies.
It was, it was a real secret room where
you took out a book and you took out a screwdriver and then...
There was a bookshelf and you had to remove the bookshelf first, and then...
The books.
The books off. You took the books off and the bookshelf off, and then the things that held up the shelf had screws into the wall, and one of those screws was a key to open the door.
Right before I was born, my dad was at the tail end of a big trip. Smuggler's lingo. A trip is a business deal from start to finish. The entire deal is a trip. For our purposes, trips are pot deals, from receiving the load to delivering it to the next location/buyer. Trips last anywhere from a few weeks to months to a year. Trips include the journey of the product from its point of origin, places like Mexico, Colombia, Thailand, Lebanon, to its final destination, in my dad's case, Northern California or his hometown, New York City. My dad's entire career in pot smuggling was as a middleman. He was a pot distributor. He was never a small-time street dealer in a sketchy alleyway. He never sold ounces. He actually laughed in my face when I asked if he ever sold just 1 pound at a time. He would get hundreds or thousands of pounds of pot from the smugglers who took it off the boats that came into San Francisco Bay. This pot would go to my dad's secure location. He would then transport the pot to a few of his trusted associates, who would in turn sell it in smaller and smaller amounts down the smuggling food chain. If the pot came into San Francisco Bay, usually from South America or South Asia, my dad would transport it to his guy in New York City. Alternatively, if my dad's supplier in New York City, his codename is Blondie, had a load come into the New York City harbor, usually from the Middle East, my dad would get a ton or more, by the way, a ton is 2,000 pounds, and he would move it across country and distribute it to the people in San Francisco Bay Area. However, it wasn't organized. Remember, this is disorganized crime. Loads just sort of came in and people found out. It was very loose. Now, my dad didn't work with groups, just a handful of lifelong trusted friends who are still lifelong trusted friends. The relationships formed were similar to the bonds formed by soldiers in war. My dad and his associates trusted each other implicitly, and integrity was everything. You were as good as your word. Now, on the night of my birth, my dad made 3 big mistakes. On this trip, known as the second Panama Red trip, My dad handed off the pot that he had stored in the